The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In chapter 4 of the Gospel of St. John, the woman of Samaria asks Jesus, "Where is the best place to worship?" This question might be expanded to include, what is the best church? What is the best religion? Is it important to go on pilgrimage to holy shrines? What is the best ritual? What is the best mantra or prayer? Jesus cut across all such questioning with his reply. The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. It was not that outer considerations of place, church, ritual, etc. are irrelevant. Each person should find those practices and observances which are compatible with his own nature. One might say, with his own vibrations. Not everyone's natural path is the same. God sent different religions into the world to satisfy different human needs. The overarching concern, however, considering that the goal is to find God, is to include in one's worship daily inner communion with the Lord. God is silence. He must be sought, therefore, in inner silence. God is absolute love. He must be sought, therefore, in the silence of love. God is spirit, and thus immaterial. He must be sought above all in the expanding peace of deep meditation. Thus, the Bhagavad Gita states in the 6th chapter, "Sequestered should he sit, steadfastly meditating, solitary, his thoughts controlled, his passions laid away, from every craving for possession freed. Wherever you are, whatever your outward beliefs and observances, seek God in the silence of your own soul." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
So again, welcome everyone. I wanted to just explain for a moment. Swami has written a reading, 52 readings for every week of the year. And he's chosen very interesting Bible and Gita quotes, those that would normally express the same truth. And oddly enough, this doesn't happen all the time, but I'm pretty sure I had this same subject last year. So I'm going to deviate just a little bit from where I usually go. It's a very interesting subject, and so I wanted to, so I just get myself situated here. So I wanted to first start with the context of this Bible quote. Swami mentioned in the reading that that this is the woman from Samaria, but this is what the full quote was. The woman from Samaria said to Jesus, "Our fathers worshipped in these mountains, and you say that Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." And Jesus answered, and then I'll abbreviate it, "But the true worshipers shall worship the Father, the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And then we are told, of course, that to worship spirit, and especially those of us who are meditators and on this path, we're told that to worship spirit, we need to go into the silence. And of course, we know that the Bible does say, be still and know that I am God. But that's also where we lose many people on the spiritual path. Because Yogananda said, most people don't know how to use the scientific or effective methods of concentration. And so they may touch just a little bit of mental calmness, but that's not enough to really anchor someone on the spiritual path. And so often we attempt to sit in the silence, and as everybody knows who has ever attempted to silence their mind, it's no easy task. And because it takes great effort and consistency, many people just drop off the path. But many people also don't understand what really is to be accomplished in silence. And so I wanted to read this other quote from Yogananda. He said, "In the mellow light of the other world, the wise perceive the inner side of stars, of living beings, of dust and iron and gold and earth and planets. All of these are dazzling with infinite brilliancy, infinite light." So we all hear often on our spiritual path that light is one of the things that we want to try to still the mind and achieve or to perceive. In fact, this temple that we're speaking in is called the Temple of Light, and the Bible is full of those references, and yoga is full of those references to communing with the light, because that light is a conscious manifestation of spirit. And spirit is consciousness. So I wanted again to remind us that Yogananda, in the autobiography, gives this incredibly wonderful experience or description of an experience in cosmic consciousness. And so we hear these wonderful description of how he perceived everything began to be transparent, and he had 360-degree vision, and he could feel and see the sap and the roots, and he could see everything around him. Everything became transparent, and everything shimmered in the light of spirit. And then here's another description. I believe this one's in the autobiography, and he said, "Soul and mind instantly lost their physical bondage." Soul and mind lost their physical bondage. "My sense of identity was no longer narrowly confined to a body, but embraced the circumambient atoms. The Spirit of God, I realized, is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light." And Sri Yukteswar says, and this is where I wanted to deviate a little bit of where we normally go with this, because Sri Yukteswar said, "It is the Spirit of God that actively sustains every force and form in the universe. Yet he is transcendental and aloof in the blissful, uncreated void beyond the worlds of vibratory phenomena." This is very important, and this is something that is much more meaningful to you and me than at first might be evident. That he is at home in his blissful, in the blissful, uncreated void beyond the worlds of vibratory phenomenon. He further explains, saints who realize their divinity even while in the flesh know a similar twofold experience. So that twofold experience is very important for us to understand why we struggle so much on the spiritual path, because we yearn often for that light, but we don't understand a very fundamental aspect of what Sri Yukteswar said, in that there is a part of God, first of all, that is beyond the world of vibratory phenomenon. Yogananda said it this way: God feels the universe. On the one side, he is ever awake in his bliss. So that's one of the twofold experiences that Sri Yukteswar talked about. On the other side, he is dreaming this universe, and that's the experience of light, of atoms, of thoughttrons and lifetrons that Yogananda describes. There's this wonderful, wonderful world of almost endless phenomenon of spirit in creation. But then the difference is that Yogananda says God knows he is dreaming. And so he's awake in his dream of cosmic creation, but he's at home in his blissful, in the blissful state of bliss beyond creation. And so I would just want to help us understand this, because this is really meaningful to you and me. He said, Satchidananda, which we are and which God is, we are individualized expressions of ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new joy. I am ever-existing. I am ever-conscious. The soul was never born, the Gita says. The soul will never die. But the universe comes and goes. There are the great nights and the great days of Brahma. And what happens to us then? And that's what I wanted to try to emphasize this morning. Let's talk about this aspect of I am. Because on the one hand, for example, when Master, in his eulogy of Gyanamata, he said, she became completely free. I watched her slip into the watchful state. So if we understand these two sides of creation, God at home in his infinite home of bliss, and then you understand that there is his creation. That creation is born of light and of Spirit's consciousness. And that's where Christ said, and where Master says, that is actually where Christ is born. In the light of creation was where Christ was born, and Jesus became one with that light. But then we have that other aspect, and it's often been referred to as the cosmic observer, for example, that Spirit is at home in his in infinity, in his blissful home. He's not dependent. Yogananda used this phrase, his desireless desire to create. He didn't need anything more than himself. He didn't need to create. But, and that's a mystery. Many people ponder the question, why in such an infinite spirit, self-contained and absolute, why would God or why would Spirit create? And the answer very, very definitely is, or I think very meaningfully is, God created because he wanted to share. What do we want to do when we feel love or we feel great joy? What's the first thing we want to do? We want to share that. And that is why God created. And he created not only each and every one of us, but he created this universe. This is a very subtle point. Let me just read this because this is a quote from the Gita that when I discovered it, it was very moving to me. The Gita says the manifested universe is the spirit's lower aspect. Its higher aspect is the true self of all being. So do you see this part of you and me that says, I am? It can never die. It can never drown. The Gita says it's unchangeable, indestructible. The soul simply is. And nothing in eternity can touch the soul. But we don't know we're dreaming. We don't know, we don't remember that eternal aspect of the soul's nature. And we need to wake up. And so often we sit in meditation and we might wish, or we might try to absorb into an experience where we perceive the light. It's a worthy desire to try to feel and see the light of spirit. But we also forget about one very important fundamental aspect, and that is, I am. And so I want to go back to the things I just read of Master for a moment. He said, the wise perceive the inner sight of stars, and in his experience of cosmic consciousness, he said, I perceived the center of this whole universe as a center in my heart. He didn't say it was the heart, but he perceived it when he was, as Sri Yukteswar said, in human form, he also had the cosmic conscious experience. But I am isn't bound to any form. It is Satchidananda, and it is individualized, but it isn't bound or in any way confined to a form. And that's not an easy thing necessarily to comprehend. It's one of the reasons why the very first meditation exercise, when you get Master's lessons, one of the very first things he does is have you begin to visualize and meditate, first of all, that your awareness fills the room, then it fills your home or your building, then it might be your city and your state and your country. And he encourages, he gives us visualizations that help us keep expanding the understanding that there isn't a form, that the self doesn't lose its sense of self no matter how vast the experience is. He said, my sense of identity was no longer narrowly confined to a body, but it embraced the circumambient atoms. The Spirit of God, I realized, is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light. Over and over again, it's important to realize that we have this part of us that we don't actually meditate on. We meditate often on the phenomenon, but we forget sometimes to turn into ourselves and say, I am. And that's why the Hong Sa technique is such an effective and deep technique, because as we reach that pause between the breaths of Hong and Sa, and that breath, we pause and we just reflect, I am, or I am he, but I am. Master actually said the seed of that meditation technique is I am. And you rest in the silence between the breaths, and that becomes longer and deeper, and you begin to reflect more deeply on who, and you begin to awaken to the realization of who I am. And in that eternal silence and in that eternal pause or calmness, we rest in the self. Because what Yogananda said, and it's a quote that people laugh at me here at Ananda because I quote it so much, but the yogis say, when the mind is deeply calm, then the inner light spontaneously appears. But what are we achieving when we have that deeply calm state? It's to anchor yourself and know that you are eternal spirit, or you are eternal existence itself. And that's all that we are. Yogananda said, you really can't describe spirit. It is cosmic consciousness. It is ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. But he said, really, bliss is the only thing. He said, it's unlike anything in the world that you will experience is spirit, because it's this conscious entity, if you will. Jesus called it the Father, but by itself, it is the cosmic observer, and you and me and everyone has that in ourselves. That part that was never born, that part that will never die, that part that is eternally existing, cannot drown, get nothing. And we want to touch that, because then, as Yogananda said, all the preparation that we do is to prepare ourselves, but also not just our bodies, because the bodies become out of the way. The meditation techniques are to enlarge our consciousness and to prepare us for the liberating shock of omnipresence. That's the way Master said it. And he said, the problem with human consciousness is that we don't know how to think and how to perceive. But he said the purpose of yoga is to mirror the universal presence of spirit. It's just like spirit. Spirit is dreaming the universe, and his essence and his awareness is in every particle. And it may seem expansive, and it may seem beyond even human imagination, but it's very important to start with this part that says, I am eternal existence itself. And I am not any of this. I'm not this body, I'm not this world, I'm not this building. We sit to meditate, and immediately we start to think about projects, or family, or sex, or business. So many things can enter into our minds, and we never touch that space, that place of stillness, because the thoughts run and run and run. And Master said the reason that people leave the path out of frustration is because they don't learn that the energy of the nervous system is fundamental. To control the energy of the nervous system is what is required in order to calm the mind. That's why he said this is a scientifically has a foundation of science and of effective concentration, because you begin to work not with so much with visualizing the light, but with the devotion of the heart and with the will of your mind and your awareness. You learn to direct the energy of the nervous system. You learn to direct that energy up to where Christ said, the eye, the single eye. And Master said, when you succeed in directing the energy of the nervous system, then you can calm the mind. But he said, every time there's energy that's going down the spine, any energy down the spine causes the mind to oscillate, and you can't actually grab that absolute state of stillness, because only there then do you become like the wise, where you begin to perceive the inner side of stars and of everything, of all creation. You begin to see the inside of Spirit's creation. So I wanted to also maybe just to quote this from Patanjali, because it's also very effective. And then I'd like to just do a little exercise with you. But Patanjali says, for one who can distinguish between the mind and the self, then thoughts in the mind cease completely. So we have to be able to learn to distinguish between the mind and the self. Many people assume they're one and the same thing, but the mind is really where ego is born. The mind is what it gets accustomed to breathing, or gets accustomed to likes and dislikes. I like this, I want this, I need this. Even breath, Yogananda said, in order to go deep in meditation and in prayer, you have to convince the mind that you don't need the breath. And then the breath, as you succeed in going into deeper and deeper levels, like in the Hang Sa, then you gradually convince the mind that these longer and longer states of stillness is our true home, and the body doesn't need the breath. You can use the body again when you bring the consciousness back, but you don't need the breath. I know that sounds contrary to every single thing we know scientifically, but the yogis have proven it. The saints have proven it. Catholic saints, yogic saints, all have been seen and found to go into that state of ecstasy where they are just fixed, if you will, on the consciousness of God. So I'd like to return to this question of concentration, and I'd like to run a little exercise with us together. I'd like to ask that we close our eyes. Almost everybody, I'm sure, has seen a movie where you see the camera go underwater and you're looking up at the surface of the water and you see the sunlight on the other side of the water's edge. And as you sink further into the water, the light becomes diminished more and more, and pretty soon you rest in darkness. There's no light of the sun. So I'd like us to go there again together for a moment, that we're just at the surface of the water and we're sinking down and we're watching the light up on the water's edge. And as we go down into the water, the light begins to disappear. Everything becomes silent. You don't hear anymore the waves or the rustle, anything exterior. It's profound and deep silence. The light is disappearing to where we are now, just sitting in dark, absolute nothingness. Just you. Just I am. No other stimulus. You don't have a name to associate with. You don't have a body to associate with. You don't have history. You don't have memory. You simply are sitting, as St. John of the Cross said, in that stark elemental awareness that you are as you are. Simply I am. As we begin to float back up toward the water surface, you begin to see the light, the sunlight at the upper surface level of the water, and you begin to hear more and perceive more outwardly. But that state of I am is what we are, and we need to learn to grow and to expand into that state, because it is God's omnipresent presence. Again, let me just read this. Spirit's lower nature is his universe, but his higher nature is the creation of individual selves, you and me. And that self is one. We are individualized, but we can rest in that silence. And then we perceive, as Yogananda said, we can mirror the universe, the same experience that Spirit is doing. One time, Yogananda said, the thrill that he experienced because he said Divine Mother in her cosmic form, so let's take it away from a motherly form, but in a cosmic form, he said Divine Mother was dancing all these little lifetrons and thoughttrons and dancing on its forehead. And he said this light and this light show, if you will, this ecstasy of light. But he said the love and the bliss behind that is what really is eternal. And yes, God's creation, God will show you endless manifestations of its ever new joy. That is our home in eternity. There is no end, as Master said. There's no end to evolution. There is no end to ever new. Ever new means that once we wake up from this dream, our lives are ever new joy. And veil after veil, Master said, God will show you endless manifestations of its ever new joy. But we have to find that sense of self so that even on a cosmic level, we're never lost. And that's why it's so important not to give up. Don't think, oh, I didn't perceive any light, any phenomenon, any cosmic drama. It will come. That is God's gift. But the greatest gift is its highest nature, which is the individual self. And that's what we want to rest in. So I encourage everyone, spend the time, practice, and if your techniques seem dry, just go with devotion. Go with, you are mine, I am thine. Do it for hours if you need to. If perchance you've lost your enthusiasm for Kriya or Hang Sa or one of the techniques, if you can't concentrate, go for japa. You are mine, I am thine. Because remember, God is reaching down, just like the story of the prodigal son. When the son finally realized that he was dying, he was perishing, but he remembered there's something better, and he started to remember his father's kingdom, and he started to go back to his father's kingdom, and the father saw him and ran toward him. So remember, you just put out the effort, and God is coming toward you. So it isn't that, this is a very important concept. God didn't put you here to torture you. He wants your freedom. It's a bad dogma to think that somehow God is here actually trying to thwart our development. It's God's play, it's God's bliss, and we need to find our home in that void or in that stillness behind vibratory phenomenon. And then consciousness, as Master said, what will happen? Consciousness begins to expand in the light, and then we know God's infinite, ever new nature. So, wishing you all a very solid foundation. What is the best way to worship? And that best way, of course, is that the kingdom of God is within you. So I pray Godspeed for your endeavors and wish you the bliss of God and Spirit.